We're going for a green aesthetic today. Ranger, I hardly know her. In my interview with Faiza Awo, we were talking about our least favorite and our most favorite classes, and her least favorite class is the Ranger, and I very much took offense to that because it is kind of the basic answer to say that the Ranger is your least favorite class.
Flashback.
I think Rangers are lame. I think
no.
Rangers are so lame.
I love Rangers. No, I don't agree with it. I just don't agree with Rangers being the worst class. I guess technically for 5th edition, they are like the worst. No, they're not even the worst. Okay, I'm gonna get into it. I'm not trying to compromise. Like, people keep putting Ranger in F tier when they're ranking the classes, when they're at least a solid B tier, maybe C tier. But definitely not F tier. I need to get into people say like everything the Rangers can do, every other class can do better, all right? If you want to be good at fighting, you play a fighter. You want to be good at sneaking and scouting, you play a rogue. If you want to be good at like nature or magic and stuff like that, you play a druid. Okay, fine, sure. I think Rangers are extremely useful. It's just over the course of time, and now that we're like on 5th edition or about to go into 1D&D, the usefulness of Rangers has just been slowly phased out of the game. You know, back in the old days of 1st edition, overland travel was extremely important, and that's what the Ranger was best at. Overland travel was a key part of playing the game. Before you get to the dungeon, you have to go through, you know, a bit of forest in order to actually get to the dungeon that was full of treasure. And going through the forest was very dangerous. The forest was extremely dangerous because there were just like random encounters anywhere you go, and you could also get lost if you didn't know what you were doing. Like, how the hell is a wizard supposed to navigate the forest? They're a nerd, they're a student, they're an academic. They don't know what it's like trudging it through the mud, through the dirt. This is where Rangers came in handy. Rangers were trackers, they were guides, they knew the forest, they knew nature. Also, they knew the dangers that were in nature, which includes the enemies that were on the random encounter table, which means they were good at avoiding random encounters. And back then, combat was brutal, okay? It took like a full day to restore 1 hit point. You couldn't just long rest and all of your hit points and abilities would come back. It took a while to recover from 1 combat. So if you were gonna crawl through forests, hex by hex, a Ranger was very important to make sure each hex you avoided a random encounter and also making sure you didn't get lost in the wilderness. Overland travel, or like exploration in general, was as key to the game as combat and role-playing were. I mean, roleplay wasn't a huge part of the game, at least not as it is now. I mean, nowadays, it's mostly just combat and roleplay. I think I'm seeing roleplaying begin to trump combat if we look at like Dimension 20 or like the more popular D&D shows. Well, combat still plays a very important role. I'd say it's still at least a third of the game. At least a third of the game we have combat, but overland travel has been completely phased out. Nowadays, you just kind of get there. Hex crawling, random encounters are still a thing, but it's kind of like you want to get from point A to point B, you go there, roll for random encounters. Do they happen? Do they not happen? If they do happen, you kind of do it, and then you long rest after it, and then you arrive at wherever you want it to be. That is not how old school D&D worked. So if you phase out what Rangers were best at, which was that hex by hex exploration and travel, you phase that out of your games, yeah, of course Rangers are gonna seem useless. It's like if you slowly phased out combat out of your game, fighters are very much going to seem useless. That's not because the class is bad, that's just because your game doesn't take into account what the abilities of the class can do. I remember in the interview with Faiza, we were talking about like the different types of Rangers in media and how they weren't really represented, which I disagree with. If you just look at like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings or like Geralt from The Witcher, or if you want to be a bit more broad with the archetypes, I mentioned cowboys like Arthur Morgan. And Faiza responded, play a gunslinger. Don't play a ranger, just play a fighter who's good at shooting, which I don't think that's what cowboys are. I don't think cowboys are purely gunslingers. If we look at Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption, or Red Dead Redemption 2, you know what I mean. Arthur Morgan is a very good example of a D&D ranger. They're good at fighting, they can hold their own in combat, but they're also good at tracking and surviving in nature. They have their animal companion horse, crafting, foraging for resources, A lot of stuff that was useful in the first editions, now we don't really pay attention to it in 5th edition. Arthur Morgan is able to brave the wilderness and extract the necessary... Arthur Morgan is able to brave the wilderness and extract whatever resources are necessary, whether it be food or items for crafting, or if it's like tracking down enemies, tracking down hunting game. When I think of fighters, I think of a soldier. I think of a gladiator. You know, someone who's mastered combat, just specifically combat. But when I think of a ranger, I think of someone who has not only... They're good at combat, yes, but they're also a master of survival. Some of you in the comments might be saying, Nico, if you want to play a character that's good at nature, then why don't you play a druid? Druids are to rangers as clerics are to paladins, if that makes any sense. Druids are the priests of nature, where rangers are like the warriors of nature. I say of nature. They're more of just warriors who have mastered nature to be on their side. It's kind of like clerics are priests of a god, and then the paladins are warriors fighting on behalf of that god. Druids are the priests of nature, and then you have rangers who are fighting on behalf of nature, or using nature to their advantage. I think the ranger archetype is pretty cool, and it definitely has a place in like the medieval fantasy that we have established as like the default setting of 5th edition. Definitely more than monks. I think rangers definitely have a place in the narrative more than monks do. I also think of rangers as kind of like the Aragorn in Fellowship of the Ring, as sort of like the mysterious man in the corner. You could make rangers cool and also like take that mysterious man in the corner archetype that rogues kind of have a monopoly on. Remove the assumption that you may steal from the party or maybe murder the party because you can't really trust the rogue. You kind of get a ranger, someone who is like a loner out in the wilderness that is helping the party, guiding them. I say loner. When I say loner, people are probably going to think of like the solo player, someone who doesn't consider the other players at the table. That's not what I mean by that. I mean the character as a loner, but they're working with the team for a common reward, so they're going to be a team player even though they're typically a loner. So if you are a DM and you have a ranger in your party who is interested in nature, exploration, overland travel, you should try to include that in your games more. Maybe get out some hex maps. Maybe it doesn't have to be hex maps. It could be just a grid map that represents, instead of like 1 square is 5 feet, it could be like 1 square is a mile or 6 miles or something like that. Just so that the ranger has a place, just so that their abilities has a place in the team. And if you're a DM without a ranger and you want to make your ranger seem useful, maybe throw some more random encounters with overland travel at your party. Maybe even have your party get lost, like actually getting lost in nature. That never happens anymore, at least not in 5th edition. We want to get from point A to point B. Why are you wasting time with all this middle bit? It's because the middle bit is part of the pillar of the game, and rangers have mastered that pillar. So if you want to make those rangers seem useful, try your best to include that pillar of the game, or that pillar of overland exploration. Together, as DMs, we can make rangers useful again, okay? Leave a like if you want to make rangers useful again. If you want to see the discussion that I'm referring to, you should watch the interview I had with Faiza. It was a really fun interview. We talked about a bunch of stuff like this. We talked about a bunch of dungeon mastering stuff, and it was a real fun time to make, so I recommend you actually check that video out. But I also have a Patreon. If you like this kind of content and you think that I should have money for making this kind of content, you should definitely join the Patreon for $3 a month. This is where the video is going to be. All these people join the Patreon, and they're super cool. We have a Discord where we talk about stuff, and then they join the Patreon and we talk about even more stuff. I run D&D for them sometimes. We have a game on Friday, and that's pretty fun. They're in the Astral Sea right now. The story of how they got into the Astral Sea is actually pretty coconuts. That might be a video one day. If this kind of video, and also the interview kind of video, if that's your kind of content, if that's the content that you're like, oh, I love that kind of content, you should subscribe to the channel, because we just keep on making videos like this. and we're never gonna stop. We are never gonna stop these videos. I'm never gonna stop. And you cannot stop me. I'm gonna keep going, and you're not gonna be able to hold me back. I'm gonna keep making these videos. I'm just gonna keep on cranking them out, and you can't do anything about it. That's the end of the video. Rangers.